This is an Easter message to listeners of the show, and for those of you who are also not listeners of the show, but happen to stumble across this on YouTube or X or anywhere else it is posted. This will be a short segment, but a powerful one, I believe. I want to start by saying that I am not a religious person, nor am I a spiritual person, nor am I a Satanist. I abhor Satanism. I believe that Jesus Christ did come in the flesh, but Jesus Christ, of course, is a form of consciousness, and my soul and my spirit, your soul and your spirit, that is Jesus Christ, and it is in the flesh, which is crucified to the cross of materiality of matter, which is, of course, the human spine and the outstretched body, the arms and the legs, and the head is the, of course, fifth point, being the spirit that rises from the four corners of the grave or the earth or the sarcophagus, etc., and it reunites with God above in heaven. So I believe in Jesus Christ as a title. I believe Jesus Christ is an identity that could be applied to all of us in recognizing our, choose the word divinity perhaps, or choose the word spiritual nature. I say I'm not a spiritual person, I'm not a religious person, because I tend to find repulsion with these types of labels, especially because if we have such a label without a clear definition, then we can just make these assumptions about somebody because they have like an R or a D next to their name, Republican or Democrat, because they have a C next to their name, they're a Christian, because they have a J next to their name, they're a Jew, or because they have an M next to their name, so they're a Muslim. Or even Buddhists, they have a B, so they're a Buddhist. And pretty much anything outside of that grouping is usually met with frustration, anger, even violence by very religious individuals. So I don't like to put myself into that category. I would say the most aggressively denied belief systems or views would certainly be Hinduism and anything that would be considered closer to nature in the sense of, I guess you could say, paganism. I don't think that's the correct word, because paganism means the religion of the country people. And so it is something that is not institutionalized. And throughout much of the ancient world, especially during the time and throughout the Roman Empire, paganism was not really the religion of the people, because paganism, as we define it today, was actually institutionalized. So it's really the Christian cult, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but the Christian cult that came into Rome and in more ways than one kind of ransacked the place and might even be responsible for the burning of Rome under Nero and the destruction of the pagan temples. I don't think the pagans or Nero would have had a reason to do that. I think it makes more sense the Christians would have been responsible for that. And of course, Christianity is adopted just shortly before the Western Roman Empire completely collapses and falls, at least historically, officially. It's a long, drawn-out process. It wasn't a day at a certain time, a certain date. But I say all of that because I want you to understand where I'm coming from before I present to you what I have to present here to you. It's also quite common in the Western world to take anything that is Eastern and either romanticize it, like Buddhists are perfect and they levitate, or to demean it as pagan, which, yeah, sure, Christianity's not pagan now, but it used to be a pagan religion. And I don't mean because of it taking elements or components from various other belief systems, practices, observations, etc. Obviously, the Christian holy days are based on the, quote, pagan holidays or holy days, which are really just the observations of nature, and the definition of that would be science. Science is an observation of nature. So really paganism is a scientific endeavor, a scientific process, if we're actually using the definitions of words, which I think is quite important to do. We know that gods like Attis, we know that gods all around the world, goddesses sometimes, Amaterasu here in Japan, go into a cave for 3 days and are resurrected. We know that the central pillar or the central figure within most of these cults is, of course, the tree or the spine or the axis mundi by which all things rotate and revolve. It is the central pillar of faith, the central pillar of the blood or the blessings that are poured out from the wound of Christ. It's the universal fountain motif that we find throughout the world, the water, the blood, whatever it is that rains down and gives us blessing. And that blessing comes in the form of a pomegranate, it comes in the form of an apple, it comes in the form of washing us clean of our sins, it comes in the form of flowers and many other things, depending on what myth you look at. So yeah, Christianity, of course, took from Mithraism, Persian religion of Mithraism, which is now modern Iran. And yes, Islam is the dominant religion in that region of the world today, and Islam has a lot in common with Christianity, and yet Islam is considered to be this kind of heathenistic pagan religion or something like this. This is how Christians tend to portray it. They all have sex with animals, even though if you read the discussions of the rabbis and the various Talmudic writings, you'll learn that many of the rabbis actually accuse all Gentiles, all Gentile women in particular, of having intercourse with animals. It's not really a Muslim thing. It's a thing that Gentiles were accused of by those who sat on the rabbinical high chair, the Sanhedrin. And I don't think that it's necessary to get into all of those details, although I do have pictures from the Talmud where I could pull this up and I could show you if you are interested in seeing that. So let's take all of that into consideration. Right? That's the baseline here. And now this is my Easter message. I want to show this to you on the screen. If you're just listening, this is a free video you can watch either on our website at tstradio.info, the links are below, or on YouTube or on X. So let me show you what I have on my screen here, okay? People like artificial intelligence. I don't, but people like AI. So we can just ask Grok, what is Easter? And Easter, of course, is defined. You probably don't need to look at Grok, but we can ask Grok because people love AI. It's the story of the arrest and the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. It's from Palm Sunday, Holy Monday, to Good Friday, and to the resurrection. Another, again, universal motif. And there are differences in the story, even in the Bible. For example, the story of Judas. What happened to Judas? The book of Matthew and the book of Acts tell two different stories. Completely different stories. I'm not going to spend time looking at that because I don't think it's necessary for this Easter message, but the book of Matthew and the book of Acts tell totally different stories as per what happened to Judas. So this is Easter. We know what Easter is probably. Some of us don't. Maybe we just like the Easter eggs and we like the candy and we like the rabbits and okay. I'm not here to make you feel bad for celebrating Easter. I'm not here to make people feel bad for having their beliefs. I'm not here to convert you to my beliefs because, as I've explained, I don't have any as it pertains to this outside of the fact that I'm obsessive about symbolism and looking at those kinds of details, and so that's what we're going to do here. So that's the Easter story, and we could also ask Grok. We don't need to ask Grok, but again, people love artificial intelligence. We could ask Grok a really important question with the right kind of terminology. And that question would be this: did Jewish people play a role, or did Jews play a role in the arrest and death of Jesus Christ in the biblical story? We know that this is true. In fact, passion plays have been used for centuries to incite anger or even violence against Jewish communities. There's a great episode of South Park about that. Christians have accused Jews of this for centuries because it's true in part. It doesn't mean every Jewish person, but of course, Jewish communities and Jewish leaders did conspire to have Jesus removed from the public eye. Whether you're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, they got together and played a significant role in the arrest of Jesus Christ, or Jesus, or whatever his name actually was. It probably wasn't Jesus, and it probably wasn't Christ, because that's a title. But nonetheless, if you read these books of the Bible, which I have, although I'm not a Christian, but if you read these books of the Bible, you will find contradictions, but you will find an underlying theme. It wasn't exclusively Jewish authorities, but that was the primary sect who were directly responsible for the arrest and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In fact, Judas himself was Jewish, and Judas is who sold the Savior out. And there's some irony to that, as you'll see here in a moment. And this video won't be much longer. This audio won't be much longer. This is just a short segment. But you'll see the irony very quickly to why that is. And of course, depending on what story or what account you read, it is largely the Jewish community or the Jewish crowd that demands the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And of course, Pontius Pilate washes his hands of it and says, I don't want anything to do with it. And you'll find, if you read about the Roman Empire, if you read the most authoritative work ever written about Rome, arguably the most, Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, you'll find that the Romans were actually really accepting, like shockingly accepting, of most religions. And the only reason that they had an issue with Jews or with Christians is because these communities of people, both Jews and Christians, did not like that people disagreed with them, or did not like that people were not part of their little group. The Jews, of course, refused to allow anybody into their communities. And because of their customs and practices, they were seen as very foreign and alien in all lands. And the Christians, who were derived from Judaism, took many of the Jewish ideas and just kind of tweaked them. Instead of bathing in blood, for example, they bathed in water as part of their baptismal ritual. And instead of sucking the blood from a child's penis, they might have just, circumcised it later. But the Christians said, hey, everybody can be saved. The Jews said only Jews can be saved. The Christians said everybody can be saved. The Jews said nobody can be saved except us. Nobody can be a part of this. It's just ours. Everybody else is on the outside. Christians said, hey, everybody can come into this and you can be saved. So the Christians changed things. And the Jews said, well, if you're not part of this, you should die. And the Christians said, well, at first they said everybody's welcome, which brought in criminals and thieves who could just be absolved of their sins. And then Christianity was largely a group of criminals. And of course, communists had to give everything to the church to be a part of it. That changed, of course. And yes, there were reformations later, several of them. But the Christians said, okay, well, now if you don't believe us that you can be saved, even though you're not in this Jewish cult, then we will also kill you. So Christians basically adopted the Jewish line and became as aggressive. And of course, these are the reasons why the Romans were very, very angry, because they just kind of wanted peace within the context of religious beliefs, which were widely accepted all throughout the empire, for the most part, also depending on what time period we're speaking of, but generally speaking, throughout Roman history. So a mob of largely Jewish people, they said, Jesus, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, We don't know exactly what they said. We can imagine something to that effect if we read the Gospels. Now, of course, not all Jews, not all of them, not all of the Jews. Okay, it's not all or nothing. Just like not all the Christians, or not all the Buddhists, or not all the Muslims, or not all of this or that. Of course not. But it is true that largely Jewish people were responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. That is just a fact. It's a fact of history. I believe Jesus was a real person. Whatever that person is, he's also a character. And he's also an archetype. But I also, I've read the Bible as a pseudo-historical text. And even from a pseudo-historical point of view, again, Jewish people are responsible for the death of Jesus. And you can actually understand why the Jews might have thought that or believed that Jesus was doing something offensive, because he's claiming to be these things, or it's being attributed to him that he's these things that are considered blasphemous to the Jews. That's not true. He's not the Son of God. It's a blasphemous thing to say. I actually understand where the Jews are coming from. And if you were to say, I am the Son of God, and tell people that today, you'd sound crazy, and people would find that blasphemous. But you have to understand, for the time period, that was considered blasphemous, not only to pagan communities, it was considered blasphemous to the Jews, where the Christians came and were came from. So I actually understand it is considered quite blasphemous that Jesus, if that is the story, was portrayed as the Son of God, literally. Now, figuratively, yes, we are all the Son of God as a soul, as a spirit, and we come in the flesh. God comes in the flesh, which is our physical body. So yes, Jesus came in the flesh, and we're all crucified in like manner. There's also the history of the fact that certain religious crimes, particularly Christian religious crimes in the early days of the integration of Christianity into Rome, were rarely ever by any magistrate treated as if they were a hangable or crucifiable offense. In fact, a lot of the times the magistrates said, we just want peace. Take a look at the pagan altar, put an incense stick on it, we'll let you go. And the Christians said, no, I want to be slaughtered for Jesus. And they aggressively pursued that end to become martyrs, because it benefited them in the same way that pretty much any group of people do those kinds of things, because it benefits them and their cause, whatever that cause is or whatever that benefit is. Okay, so we know that this is a factual thing. It is a pseudo-historical thing as well as a historical thing. It's a spiritual thing. This is a fact. Jews were part of the conspiracy to arrest and to crucify Jesus Christ. Now, here's the problem. Under the U.S. Department of State's definition of anti-Semitism, you can see this on your screen, they use the definition from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, which the U.S. is a member of. It's a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism, but it is nonetheless a definition of anti-Semitism. They have to have some definition. We don't have a definition of racism, but we have a definition of anti-Semitism. It's anything the IHR or the IHRA says. Okay. And we have confirmation of that, not just from the State Department. This is their website. We also have that from the embassy website, the U.S. Embassy in Israel, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. And you can read that there on your screen, or you can go look it up or click the links below in the video. I'll have, if they're not up already, I'll have them up here in a little bit. Okay, so there's the definition. Okay, and this is not like an old story or a new, it's a long-standing agreement. Here is a notice in 2022 about this. This is through Republican and Democrat administrations. So what is the working definition of anti-Semitism as per the IHRA? Well, among so many other things, here's one of them. Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism. That is to say, claiming that Jews killed Jesus. Or blood libel. Now, you already know that what we just discussed, by this definition, would be considered claiming that Jesus was killed by Jews. I can also show you that the New York City Health Department website has an entire section on how to properly give what is referred to as direct oral suctioning, the safe bris. There's how you pronounce it, direct oral suctioning, when a baby is circumcised. Some ritual Jewish circumcisers, Ohelium, do a practice called metzitza bip. And I don't speak the language, so make fun of me, but it's still true. It's the part where the mole uses their mouth to suck blood away from the baby's circumcision wound as part of the circumcision ritual. Look at that. So to point that out would also be considered blood libel, and to point out what the Bible says would be considered anti-Semitic. Now here is the Department of Homeland Security screening the social media accounts of aliens and immigrants to determine if their activity is anti-Semitic. And this is a story from April 9th, 2025. Here's the Department of Justice announcing a task force to combat anti-Semitism. This is February 3rd, 2025. This is for college campuses to make sure that nobody is saying what a foreign country would prefer not be said, even if that means violating your most basic fundamental First Amendment rights. And although this is not a law, H.R. 6090 is the Anti-Semitism Aware Act. And it essentially would criminalize exactly what the IHRA says, claiming that Jews killed Jesus by, reading the Bible would be considered an act of anti-Semitism. Now, the definition of a Semite is a member of any people who speak or spoke a Semitic language. This includes Jews and Arabs, meaning that Muslims are also Semites. Now, we're not going to go into a long history of that, but it is important to point that little detail out for context because the definition of things are important. Instead of using that definition, the IHRA has its own definition, which includes pretty much any of these things that you see on your screen, accusing Jews of wrongdoing, even if it's true. Basically, anything that Jews consider offensive to themselves, even if you're pointing out crimes they've committed, then that is anti-Semitism, including the story of the arrest, of the traitor, of the crucifixion, and of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what you get. And sadly, there are plenty of people who told you so. On my show, The Secret Teachings, I've been pointing this out for damn near a year now. This is where we are. This is what the current administration is doing, criminalizing not just your right to speak and to protest. And no, I'm not talking about acts of violence and calls for death. I'm talking about your right to protest peacefully, your right to speak and engage in discourse, your right to access public forums and have conversations, and hell, your right to post mainline news articles, for that matter, to talk about anything that's on that list or associated with that list. That is considered anti-Semitic, and by definition of the term and the way it's being employed is going to prevent people from maintaining their green card status or their visa status or obtaining a visa at all. And if that is the only crime they've committed, quoting the Bible, let's say, or opposing a foreign government, let's say, what makes you think that doesn't apply to you as well as an American citizen? So if I were to show you this on the screen, and I'm not sure if the Chicago Tribune wants me to show you because they put up this little paywall, but if I try to stop the paywall came back up. This is a article here from the Chicago Tribune, Fixing the Numbers at Auschwitz, where they talk about how Polish and Jewish scholars have reassessed the numbers and have found that, well, the numbers are closer to a fraction of how many people. Reportedly, originally 4 million died at Auschwitz. The number was closer to like 1.5, and that included others, not just Jews. To point out that fact and to point out a Chicago Tribune article would be, under the political administration in power in the United States right now, that would be an act of anti-Semitism. And if that definition can be used to prevent someone from obtaining a visa, or someone loses a visa, or someone cannot get a green card, or they have the green card torn up, it'll apply to American citizens as well. So that's what you voted for. And if you voted for the other side, it would have also happened, because there's clearly some sort of parasitic, anti-Republican, anti-human force at play here that is both material and non-material. And it really despises Jesus, and it really despises consciousness, and it really despises life, and particularly children, and especially women. Look at Weimar Germany. That gives you kind of an idea of what this evil force is that we're dealing with. It's, again, material and non-material. There is a war between good and evil. And I need to say this as I wind down this segment. You don't have to be a Christian to see this. You don't. And you don't have to be a Satanist if you're not a Christian, because that's stupid, and I'm not. But it is very obvious when you look at the evidence what we're dealing with here. While we're running around screaming about America 2.0 and we're winning, I'm not. Many other people are. They have criminalized the Bible, they've criminalized the First Amendment, and they have criminalized Easter. So, happy Easter. Maybe that's anti-Semitic to say. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know. You think I'm being hyperbolic? You think this is sensationalism? No, it's just objective reality. Thank you for watching and listening to this. The majority